So come audit season, if an auditor comes in and asks you, hey, is this written by human or an AI? You'll say AI. And then the auditor will ask, how much of it is written with an AI? That's a difficult question to answer unless you actually accounted for it for every single run of the prompt. And what if the auditor digs in further? Show me how you validated that this summary didn't overestimate or underestimate risk. What were the pointers for your human to approve this? At that point, hopefully, I hope executives don't just rely on that, but just hypothetical scenario, maybe they just point towards the raw output that AI generated and the human perfected. This one is more nuanced. My session is more about the very subtle ways that AI is slowly affecting our judgment. And if you've been in audit before, you know audit is all about critically evaluating that judgment. Anybody here who was an auditor? Any here C-levels, executives, board members? Okay, anybody engineers who build AI systems? Okay, somewhat of a mixed bag. We can work with that. Okay, the reason we're talking about this now is because AI is getting increasingly embedded into AppSec pipelines and security tooling. So everybody's happy, velocity is up, but visibility is more like an afterthought. We are going to talk about how AI-powered AppSec. It's an amazing innovation today, but if you're not careful, it could turn into an audit nightmare tomorrow. Because like we've been hearing about all day, governance is slowly catching up. But first, I want to set the premise. This is not an anti-AI talk. There was a time it was very fashionable to be anti-AI. I was at a few conferences last year and all the talks were about AI is messing things up for us. But I think we're past that point now. So this is not an anti-AI talk. It's more about how to make innovation survivable under audit and incident scrutiny. Because it is going to happen. We just have to be sure that we have something to fall back on. We find ourselves in this position where AI is now a control panel, and this control panel is influencing what we ship, it's influencing what we prioritize and ignore, and it's also influencing what we want to protect in live environments. And we want to do this so fast that, again, we can't wait for governance to show up and give us some guidelines. Audits need repeatable results. For the same input, audit needs the same output unless a change was deliberately introduced. But as you must be aware, models are non-deterministic in nature. And what that means is that for the same input, you get several similar outputs. Not different outputs, you get similar outputs. Hi, that's awesome music. That bass though. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, awesome. I sound very wrong to me, so glad you can hear me. Okay, so everybody, thank you for choosing to be here this afternoon in this breakout session. We are going to talk about how AI-powered AppSec. It's an amazing innovation today, but if you're not careful, it could turn into an audit nightmare tomorrow. Because like we've been hearing about all day, governance is slowly catching up. But first, I want to set the premise. This is not an anti-AI talk. There was a time it was very fashionable to be anti-AI. I was at a few conferences last year and all the talks were about AI is messing things up for us. But I think we're past that point now. So this is not an anti-AI talk. It's more about how to make innovation survivable under audit and incident scrutiny. Because it is going to happen. We just have to be sure that we have something to fall back on. And this talk is also not about, I don't know, like rogue AIs merging into your prod environment or introducing new security bugs. Yes, but that's a different talk. This one is more nuanced. My session is more about the very subtle ways that AI is slowly affecting our judgment. And if you've been in audit before, you know audit is all about critically evaluating that judgment. Anybody here who was an auditor? Any here C-levels, executives, board members? Okay, anybody engineers who build AI systems? Okay, somewhat of a mixed bag. We can work with that. Okay, the reason we're talking about this now is because AI is getting increasingly embedded into AppSec pipelines and security tooling. So everybody's happy, velocity is up, but visibility is more like an afterthought. I mean, just like with any other technology, right? Not just AI. And regulations are slowly catching up. But the most important question, why me? Who am I? Am I C? Am I engineer? What am I? So the answer is that I'm currently an R&D engineer focusing on AI research at Black Duck. And at Black Duck, we're more about protecting your supply chain, software composition analysis, SAST, all of that AppSec fun stuff. And my day job is literally about checking where AI fits in all of these different parts, what its boundaries are, where we should put it, shouldn't put it. We're always coming up with prototypes. Just this year, we released a new product that is all AI powered. Before this, I was actually out in the field. I was a consultant. I was doing source code reviews and pen tests for Fortune 500 companies. So I have been out there. I know what customers want. I know how annoying it is to triage vulnerabilities. And I did have a short experience working as an IT risk analyst at one of the big 4 companies. So I do understand the critical lens through which auditors look at evidence and your policies and your answers. Overall, I have over 10 years of experience in the industry. And so I believe that the bubble has burst. I understand reality. I know what people really care about up the chain and how things like trade-off matters. I do have a grad degree from a university in the US. And as part of that coursework, actually, I was in the trenches. I was taking these courses that was about AppSec, about vulnerabilities, firewall rules, setting up tooling, how to remediate code vulnerabilities, network security, all of that technical jargon. So I have worn multiple different hats over these 10 to 12 years. And that's why I'm here to show and share my experiences with AI. So 2025 marked the beginning of trying to incorporate AI everywhere in your org. And if you remember, there was rapid experimentation. All CEOs, CISOs were like, can we use AI to do this and that? And this led to a lot of competitive pressure as well. But that pace was so fast that companies weren't ready or equipped to even understand what to govern and how fast they need to govern. And so even though humans were there in this process, in this experimentation, they were overseeing everything critically. The real question is how much of that evaluation or oversight was already shaping the human? It was too late by then because humans were already too impressed. And to back that up, here are some numbers thanks to Stack Overflow. They did a developer survey in 2025, and these are the numbers from that. Font is small, there are too many numbers, so I'll just sum it up for you. When they asked developers how much AI agents were helping them, 69% agreed that it helped them increase productivity, which is awesome. Everybody loves that. But a more interesting number that I found in that survey was how much do you trust the output coming out from this AI agent, whatever solution you have? And surprisingly or not so surprisingly, only 3% said that they were actually trusting it, which is good news from AppSec folks, but bad news from people who are trying to look at it from a productivity perspective. And even despite that low confidence in AI, we find ourselves in this outsourcing era. And why shouldn't we? Because it's helping us do better, faster things. We are using it to summarize code paths so that your engineers don't have to go through alert fatigue. They can quickly triage vulnerabilities, come up with a mitigation strategy, see where they should focus their level of effort, and you can even use it to summarize it in a way and the risk in a way so that non-AppSec folks, people who don't really understand what SQL injection is, so that they can understand it too. And we're also using it to protect ourselves at runtime in live environments through anomaly detection to threat modeling, and also incident response. And this is evidenced by the fact that around 73% of vendors in the cybersecurity space ship products that are somehow related to or powered by AI. And this entire research market, or the entire product market, is expected to reach over 45 billion by 2027. I have issues estimating numbers, so I actually Googled what that number means. And apparently, if you stack $100 bills vertically, anybody wants to guess what it'll surpass? Say that again.
Earth to the moon.
Yeah, actually, that's pretty close. Apparently, it can reach the International Space Satellite. That's how tall 45 billion is. But anyway, so we find ourselves in this position where AI is now a control panel. And this control panel is influencing what we ship. It's influencing what we prioritize and ignore. And it's also influencing what we want to protect in live environments. And we want to do this so fast that, again, we can't wait for governance to show up and give us some guidelines. Here are a few examples of what's happening in the world, the kind of regulations that are out there, what's in progress, what's pretty mature. They're usually objectives, obligations, guidance, and we're going to go through each of them. No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to go through boring policy documents. No, that's a little out of scope for my domain. Okay, so by now you probably agree that AI in AppSec is somewhat of a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag of speed, scale, and the kind of trust or the kind of risk that you can't reliably measure because it's everywhere and it's very contextual. So let's be curious and see what questions are we not really asking in your organization. Do you know what data led to this decision? Do you know if you picked the right model for this task? So to summarize, is it just that Gen AI introduces new risk? I mean, of course it does. Every new technology that we incorporate brings in new risk. So what is so discussion worthy about Gen AI? It is the fact that not what risk it's incorporating, but more about how it is getting in there and who is letting it get in there and how much of it is even measurable. Can we even audit that? What's the metric to quantify it? Because earlier, as we were building like web apps and stuff, we had like vulnerabilities, securities, we had solid numbers like false positive rate. But what does that translate to in terms of behavior of a model? It's very difficult to do that, and that's what we're going to dive into. And to really understand this, let's look at it from different vantage points of who is getting affected by AI in their AppSec pipelines and see how trust is getting delegated without their knowledge. So from an end user's perspective, people who are actually chatting with an AI, people who are building agentic workflows, so many other applications. From their perspective, they want speed, they want availability, and they end up implicitly trusting that the model is always right. They trust that their prompt was perfect and that they've picked the right model and parameters like temperature, p-value, and all that technical jargon. From the AI's perspective or from the workflow's perspective, they want to focus on how easily you can incorporate it and how easy it is for them to stand out from their competitors. So unfortunately, they trust that users are looking at all of this information before they decide to do something. They assume that users are looking at documentation and that they understand how to write good prompts. Because if you've chatted with Gen AI, it always leads with like a thing at the end that says, like a disclaimer that says, models could be wrong, please verify data. So that is okay when you're having a conversation with a chat GPT or something, but what if it's getting invariably incorporated into your pipeline? Like, how do you measure or account for that disclaimer? From a higher level, executive level, in the real world, it's more ROI. You are looking at it as a cost saver, as an accelerant, but also you trust that AI is being used responsibly in your org. You trust that policies are out there, that maybe you trust that models care and have security built in. But as history taught us, a lot of new technology doesn't really care about security from the get-go. It's more like an afterthought. And coming to auditors just want to get in there. They just want to ask you a few questions, ask for evidence, knock off some boxes, some security controls, and prove that, hey, look, you have the certification. Oh, you comply by your customers' requirements. So they unfortunately trust that orgs are already empowered to generate these evidential facts, and that they know what is happening with AI in their pipelines, and they can answer difficult questions.
Have a meeting in Norman? That's anything.
So did you notice how trust is slowly getting out of our hands? Did you see how risk is slowly getting introduced in ways that are contextual? So, and this is because at the core, audits and models are designed to do completely opposite things. And that's when the friction starts, right? For example, audits need repeatable results. For the same input, audit needs the same output unless a change was deliberately introduced. But as you must be aware, models are non-deterministic in nature. And what that means is that for the same input, you get several similar outputs, not different outputs. You get similar outputs, which is even worse, because how do you prove to an auditor that I picked the third output to prove that this input worked, right? Because they're all similar. And audits need concrete, factual evidence, but models at the most can generate like an educated guess. And to be really crude, they're actually finishing the end of your sentence, right? So again, if you're not using the right parameters, if you're not pointing it to the right data source or pointing it to the perfect, again, prompt inputs, using the right temperature control and all of that, it will generate something that is incomplete or out of context, or something that just wasn't what you were looking for and you didn't even know about it. And lastly, audits need accountability. If you notice, every process or every incident is eventually tied to a role. Very rarely is it tied to a system. And who sits at that role? A human. But now, because of automation bias, that human is getting influenced by the system they're using, which is AI powered. Automation bias is just a fancy way of saying that you blindly trust that an automation or a tool works and is always accurate. That was always a problem in the past, but again, with Gen AI, it is a little bit more dangerous because of the prejudice we have towards AIs. We think that they're either too wrong or either too right. We don't really have that baseline standard that, okay, it is correct, I don't have bias. So none of these contradictions really mean that AI does not belong in AppSec, because I believe that it absolutely does. It just means that we need to govern how trust is formed and try to find middle ground between these differences. To really drive this home, I have two hypothetical scenarios. The first one I have is assume that you have a team of engineers who are working on certain software products, and you've allowed them to use a very thoroughly checked, legal, compliant, everything else model. They're using that model to triage vulnerabilities. You have done your due diligence, you know that you trust that AI, and they use it to very quickly triage vulnerabilities, create remediation reports, create Jira tickets, the whole CI/CD pipeline. And everybody's happy because human is in the loop. Everybody's happy because productivity is up. But you will notice that over time, we will, as humans, form trust heuristics. And what that means is, and this happened even before AI, and I'm guilty of this too. I would trust that a certain tool is good at finding, say, SQL injection, but really bad at finding DOM XSS. So when I have some constraints, like I'm in a time-boxed assessment. I need to deliver reports fast, or my sprint is ending. Whatever pressures you have to find that trade-off. You have to find that trade-off of where should I put my level of effort based on the confidence I have in tools and processes. So again, with AI, we will end up over-relying on AI. And the risk is that AI is going to increasingly shape such little decisions that are going to eventually roll up the chain and affect big summary reports. So even though we have great advantages, like we're going to help engineers deal with the noise that tools create, we're going to help non-AppSec people understand vulnerabilities, we're going to have very quick decisions made at the end of the quarter. But at the end of the day, we are introducing a false sense of coverage. They will think if it was important enough, an AI will find it. There could be overconfident explanations from the AI, which means humans will even more trust it. And again, only engineers and people who actively work with your products and services understand the entire context. They understand the different entry points into your application. So unless all of this was actually provided to the model in the right way, these edge cases will disappear and you will have some kind of blind spots into your org. Another scenario I have is about how we use AI to generate summaries of numbers that we don't understand. So everybody has had dashboard fatigue where there's so many numbers and you don't know what are your immediate next steps. So I think in 2025, we saw a lot of these tools which would summarize these numbers for you and identify the top 5 action items with the highest impact. And you have this in your org and you're using it and everybody's happy. A human is coming in, looking at what the AI has authored and summarized. And executives probably or department heads are using these summaries to make big decisions around budgeting, compliance, calculating the risk posture, and so many other things. So come audit season, if an auditor comes in and asks you, hey, is this written by a human or an AI? You will say AI. And then the auditor will ask, how much of it is written with an AI? That's a difficult question to answer unless you actually accounted for it for every single run of the prompt. And what if the auditor digs in further? Show me how you validated that this summary didn't overestimate or underestimate risk. What were the pointers for your human to approve this? At that point, hopefully, I hope executives don't just rely on that, but just hypothetical scenario, maybe they just point towards the raw output that AI generated and the human perfected. Maybe they will show vendor responses or their docs or some kind of raw data that they captured. But if the auditor follows up with more stringent factors like, okay, this is good, but how do you know that none of this was affected by uncertain data or non-triage data? How do you know that when the model changed, there was a lot of drift and you had no clue? How do you know that you didn't have version control as the output was changing with every quarter? And now it's the end of the year, everything is a retrospective. At that point, it's going to get difficult. We have to go back, check in with our department heads, with our tools, vendors, and try to scramble and find any means of data to prove that that summary report was correct. At this point, you're probably asking, why is this any different from what we had pre-AI? Audits were hard. Audits are still hard. We still find it difficult to find the perfect evidence, right? And I'm with you on that. That's a very valid question. I would ask the same. The difference is very subtle. So pre-AI, all of this data was very raw and unfiltered. It was a nightmare to deal with, but at least it was real. It could always be tied back to something. And humans were coming in using their years of experience, using their context and presence of mind to make sense of the numbers and write a report. It was also collaboration. A lot of people would come together and create these big reports that would help make big decisions. And even if we didn't like the result of an audit, even if we didn't like the end result or if some bad incident happened, we could always trace it back to this team to a person, to a tool that generated the data that created that summary. But post AI, along with automating everything, we ended up automating interpretation. Interpretation is not something that we can quantify, right? It's subjective. So that's where we're at. And so when we have summaries being written by an AI, it came from a probabilistic and algorithmic source, not from a raw and unfiltered source like from a human looking at data. So that combined with overconfident language, and anyone thinks that AIs are very agreeable. Anytime you contradict it, they'll say, yeah, you're right. I should have foreseen that, right? So when the language is so overconfident and agreeable, it's introducing bias into the human who is authoring it, and now they've lost their neutral stance. So if you notice, the audit has shifted from auditing something solid and static, like config files, auditing rule sets. We have moved on to auditing behavior, which again is like a psych exercise. How do you audit behavior of a model? Okay, so yeah, we're great on time. I have 3 takeaways. So hopefully by now you do notice that this is a problem and it is pretty nuanced, but it's not too late. I don't want to just talk about problems. We will talk about some solutions and controls that are realistic. So the winner takeaway, the winner thing that you can do is to incorporate AI observability. It's exactly what it says. It's about being able to monitor and observe what AI is doing in your pipeline, how much it is doing, and why it is doing. And this means different things in different stages. So a typical like agentic workflow or AI workflow will have several stages. At the prompt stage, this is where you want the ability to track inputs and analyze the prompts and the outputs that are coming out of it and have some sort of version control. This is also the stage where you want to have a rough idea about what operational costs and risk you're trying to accept. Okay, if the AI is wrong by this much, I'm just going to accept it. It's okay. It's not a high impact decision it's making. This is also a stage where you want to keep a track on how many tokens you're using. Like, am I burning 2,000 to 100,000 tokens for a relatively small task? Are there any signals that show that an AI is being inefficient? Like, why is it burning 1 million tokens for calculating a report? I'm sorry, I don't know why that happened. Hopefully you can see it. But at the second stage, the data stage, I talk about RAG. And this is where you're constantly feeding data back into your pipeline to make sure that the models have better context to be able to help you better. So as you can guess, the quality of data really matters. The time, the frequency of updates really matters. And you want to keep an eye on, is there any latency? Is there something that is causing RAG to glitch and showing up somewhere downstream? It's not working, but I have to. Oh, there it is. Okay. So here are some real world examples of what these controls could look like. So at the prompt stage, it could look like if you change the prompt in 1 quarter to focus on high EPSS risks rather than just critical risks, how much did that change your final summary report? If the model has updated and say Anthropic or GPT, whatever, has changed the model very silently, like a small update, how much has that affected you and did you log it? And if you're generating these summaries, do you have any indicators that tell you that it came from a place of static data and not something subjective that the AI just thought of based on its training data rather than your RAG data? And with the RAG phase, some examples could be, what indicators do you have to show that the data you're feeding is still fresh? It doesn't make sense to feed data at the end of the quarter when you're trying to generate a report like mid-quarter, right? Things like that. And if some tools are feeding data to these RAG pipelines, do you have clear labeling to identify failures and any kind of issue on the tool side? Okay, from the agent level, the first thing you want to notice is if an agent is going through several reasoning steps to arrive at a conclusion, it's very important to log that. And it's maybe even a good idea to have some sort of a standard that you set, some kind of baseline, so that you know that it's not deviating from the kind of steps that you want it to take. And this is also the place where you want to maintain your security hygiene, like you're bounding your tools, bounding where data is going, what capacity the agent is working in. We'll talk about that in the next slide. You want to keep an eye on any kind of failures, early failures that are affecting the judgment of the agent, if it's ending up in a recursive loop and just bringing down your whole system, things like that. And some examples for this stage are if you have any signals or any alerts that show that, hey, why is this agent constantly downgrading my legacy vulnerabilities? My legacy system is still out there, so why is it ignoring that? Or another example would be, why are my risk acceptance rates not within a certain threshold when I've clearly defined it for the agent? And the last layer is about the product level, where you want users to actively work with the system, which they will, but you want them to constantly interact with it and maybe grab some feedback. Are you trying to look at the task status from a perspective of pass and fail, or are you trying to dig in even more and get more subjective so that you can again feed it into RAG? And some examples of this stage could be, is there any partiality towards, auth vulnerabilities over data vulnerabilities? And why is that happening? So clear labeling will help us answer those questions. Another example is, what if you're seeing frequent escalations with one model over the other? And we won't know this answer unless we actually build in this kind of signaling, logging, and labeling in an early design level. So the second takeaway I have for you is about the boundaries that we have to set for an agent. I think a few earlier talks already touched upon this subject, so I'll try to keep it short. So the first thing you want to understand is my agent working in an advisory role, an assistive role, or a decisive role? And if you want to make it work in a decisive role, it's very important to back it up with some kind of testing, some kind of benchmarks before you roll it out so that you know what the standard deviation is. And if it is making some big decisions, where is that decision coming from? Is it coming from deterministic data or its own data? And the last piece I have is about human in the loop versus keeping humans at the right boundaries. If you have humans in the loop everywhere, humans are unhappy because now you've put a lot of operational cost on them, but up the chain executives are happy because now you're controlling risk. So it's a very delicate balance to find. And one example of this could be putting humans at certain boundaries where you're accepting risk. An example, you let the agent pass off the triage status for, say, stored XSS or blind SQL injection, which is a very critical vulnerability. But for something normal, something low impact on your internal app, maybe the agent can make the decision on its own. The last takeaway I have for you is about explainability. And this is key when audit comes up or incidents happen. You need to be able to explain why an agent arrived at a conclusion. We talked about creating some sort of a template. So you force it to go through certain thinking steps before coming to a conclusion. And it's also very useful to watch out for overconfidence. In some cases, overconfidence is good. We want to be able to rely on the AI. But in some cases, it could be medium or low confidence. So again, if you label, it'll help you answer difficult questions down the line. And the last one is, I just spoke about that. So if we were to revisit that slide from before about audits and models being really different and how do we find middle ground, yes, audits need repeatability and models cannot keep up with that, but models can guarantee that for the same inputs and parameters, you will get that same output. So you don't focus on the output, you focus on what you fed to get that output. So through logging and parameters and everything, you will be able to answer questions like why something was decided. And when you account for all possible outputs, you're trying to accept the non-deterministic nature rather than pretend like it doesn't exist. And if you use things like confidence bands and severity bands over scores, you are ingraining the kind of uncertainty into your humans so that they're better informed and they can maintain some kind of unbiased opinion. And if you want your models to be more explainable, they can't. That's the reason they're very smart, right? If you want to force explainability, it's not going to help you achieve your task from an objective perspective. So instead of that, label your data so that you know what is explainable versus what is actually factual. The last one, yes, we want to have some kind of accountability by taking automation bias into consideration. So with smarter and more explicit prioritization by users or your RAG data analysis, we will be able to answer questions like why something was escalated or ignored. And as always, with automation bias, it's a great idea to get everybody under the same hood through training, collaboration, so that they can tackle that automation bias and understand and share experiences like, you know, this model is not doing great with this, or this model is not doing great with this other vulnerability. These are just some examples that I have about trust patterns that get generated over time and how you should translate that into something more meaningful. So if you're noticing in discussions, people say, yeah, I trust the tool. It's better to encourage having more cross-check signals, educate people what to look for to cross-check what that output is. Instead of going off a single curated dashboard with a lot of numbers, try to enhance it with something more dependable and mix it with AI, make it a hybrid solution so that it's not one instead of the other. If you're noticing that there's an implicit influence in your organization and people are just accepting that, it's a great idea to encourage explicit labeling, which will help your RAG pipeline, and maybe over time, it's okay to have implicit influence. And as always, with any new technology, it's good to start in the beginning, like shift left, rather than be like a reactive band-aid. To summarize, good AI-powered AppSec, according to me, is 3 things. It is bounded, it's transparent, and it is selectively decisive. So stop chasing determinism, stop chasing perfect explainability because models aren't that, and stop chasing human control because humans are not going to like that. But instead, the winners will be having decision boundaries, having observability like we talked about, governability, being able to generate evidence like through quick SQL queries, and encouraging training and collaboration so that people know what are the boundaries of what you have implemented. So with that, thank you. Any questions? Either that was too hard or too easy. Okay, thank you everyone for making the time. Hey.